What's up, everybody? This is Chris again with the Discipling Culture here at New City Church. And just want to kind of walk you through one of the most prevalent tools that I find myself using almost somewhat on at least a weekly basis. And this tool really moves into who we are. It talks a lot about our identity. And so, like, if you've been discipling long, you know, man, that people's identities are all messed up. Like, we get our identity from our job, we get our identity from our spouse, we get our identity from our kids, we get our identity from our addiction. I mean, it doesn't matter where it comes from. Eventually, it will own you. And some of you may be watching this and saying, well, I think it's okay to get my identity from my kids, but let me just kind of lean on you. Like, even good things like that will eventually own you because it was never meant to be that way. And so, for example, like if all of your identity is into your kids right now, what happens when they grow up and move away? Like what happens to you? Like for 18 years, man, you've been living out of them and through them, so what would happen to you? Like you'll find yourself in a tough situation because this identity was never meant to own you. And so I just want to kind of walk you through this just a little bit. I find that even in the church, like a lot of pastors find their identity in the amount of size or the size of their congregations. And it can really mess you up, right? It can really mess you up. The size of your ministry determining on whether or not there's value on your life. And so let me just kind of stop. Let's just take a breather for a second. Let's open the Word and let's see what Jesus says. Okay, I'm going to take you into Matthew 3. We're going to be in verse 13. It says, "Then Jesus came from Galilee to the Jordan to be baptized by John. But John tried to deter him, saying, 'I need to be baptized by you, and do you come to me?' Jesus replied, 'Let it be so now. It is proper for us to do this to fulfill all righteousness.' Then John consented. As soon as Jesus was baptized, he went up out of the water. At that moment, heaven was opened, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting on him. And a voice from heaven said, 'This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased.'" So let's just kind of pause through that. Let's kind of paraphrase that for just a second. John's baptizing in the baptism of repentance. Jesus comes up and says, "John, I need you to baptize me." John's like, "There's no way that I can baptize you." And Jesus is like, listen, it has to go down this way. All right? Lots of reasons for that. Don't want to get into that right now. But what you see is that Jesus walks in obedience here. And so John takes him in, baptizes him in the river. Jesus comes up. It says the heavens open. And at that moment, like the Spirit of God descended on him like a dove, and it came to rest on him. And then the heavens opened with this massive voice that said, "This is my Son, with whom I am well pleased." Period. Now, prior to this moment, Jesus hadn't started his ministry. Like, we don't know anything that Jesus did much prior to this point. From here, his ministry begins. All right? And so we see the Lord, the Father, say to him, "This is my Son with whom I am well pleased," period, before Jesus had ever actually done much. All right? And so let me just kind of draw this out for you. Like, picture this as a triangle. And at the top of it is the Father. Okay? Now, as the arrow moves to the right-hand side of this triangle, about midway, we're going to write the word Jesus in here, and here's why. It's because we know that the moment that you confess Jesus as Messiah, the moment that you confess that Jesus is Lord of you, the moment that Jesus becomes the head of your life, like, you get a lot of things. Like Ephesians 1 talks about all the things that you get, but the number one thing that you get is the Father looks at you and now sees Jesus inside of you. Like, the things that you've done in your past, they're over with. The future sins that you commit, they're done. It's because he sees Jesus when he looks at you. So whoever you were is over with. The old is gone, the new is here, and he sees somebody who's upright, holy, and blameless and set apart. Like, that's what he sees. Like, when the Father looks at you, that's what he sees now, because Jesus is alive in you. Only because you confessed him as Lord. Now, if you have not confessed him as Lord, you don't get this. Like, that's not what the Father sees. But if you have confessed him as Lord of your life and things changed because of it, then when the Father looks at you, he sees Jesus. And because he sees Jesus, the same thing that he said to Jesus here in Matthew 3 is the same thing that he says to you. He says, "This is my Son, Chris, with whom I am well pleased." Period. "This is my daughter, Mary, with whom I am well pleased." Period. And out of this statement from the creator of the universe himself, we roll into our identity. Like, this is who we are. Like, whether you make this massive commitment to the community or whether you are an invalid and cannot get out of a wheelchair, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter the things that you're going to do, didn't do, will do. It doesn't matter. From this point on, the Lord becomes pleased with you because he sees Jesus living inside of you. And he says, this is my son whom I love. This is my daughter whom I love and whom I am well pleased with, period. Not if they do this or if they don't do this. It's like, this is who I love, period. And man, when you begin to preach that gospel to yourself, like the pressure just comes off of you, like you no longer have to be perfect, you no longer have to impress your friends, like you just sit in the fact that he loves you regardless. And out of this, man, comes obedience. Like, it just kind of begins to be the normal factor. It's how it was meant to be. Like, you begin to just obey. Like, you don't obey to grow close to Jesus. You grow close to Jesus and you can't help but obey. And it's how this thing works, because when you obey him, you find your freedom there. Like, you get released from all these things that have been holding you back, like from all these lies that you've been believing, from all these things that have been holding you captive, like you get freedom from them. But it's only because Jesus is alive in you and you begin to understand your identity. And so I got to lean on you, man. You got to preach this to yourself over and over again, because your identity can be stolen in a heartbeat. And so over and over again, you tell yourself that I am his son, I am his daughter with whom I am well pleased. Now let me kind of lean into you with a pitfall of this, all right? I'm going to lean into you with two of them. The first one works like this. It's like, if you choose to move down the other side of the triangle, like if you go to Father straight to obedience, man, let me just kind of lean into you on this. Like, I see this on Sunday morning all the time. Like, this massive sermon will be preached. People will come up and they'll say, I have to do this, I have to do that, I have to do this, I have to do that. And you're like, hold up. Without the proper discipling, man, they will totally miss the forest for the trees. And what they'll do is they'll start trying to be better. Like, they'll start trying to obey more and trying to just work it up, like self-will themselves into things. And what happens is, when you skip that Jesus part, when you move from the Father straight down to obedience, what happens is, man, you become a Pharisee. Like, over time, you just become a Pharisee saying, I'm trying. Why is nobody else trying? Like, I'm trying to keep myself clean. You're self-willing yourself, and you're becoming a whitewashed tomb because you're not working out of your identity. And what's going to inevitably happen to you is that you will become captive to this. Like, your heart will grow cold towards the things of God. And so stay away from the left-hand side of that triangle. Always move down the right. And the other thing that I would lean on you is this. Don't teach this until you've learned it. Like, you're going to have to constantly relearn this, but learn it first. Preach it to yourself over and over. Get up in the morning and proclaim who you are. Like, understand the identity triangle is all about you because of what Jesus has done for you, right? And when you learn this, man, you will start to exist for his glory, and then you'll be ready to teach it to others. So, man, that's the identity triangle, man. I hope you learned something there. May God bless you. Keep discipling.